19th, 2026. We are in the 5th year, day 85 since the start of the full-scale invasion. Welcome to the Situation Report. In today's report, we will once again see territorial gains, specifically at Kostiantynivka, and we will also take a direct look at the situation in Pokrovsk. But what we will also see, of course, are complaints within the Russian population, and they are, of course, very grotesque. And we will also take a look at how China is gradually taking over Russia. So let's get started. Then, near the Kremlin, a man stands in front of the camera and desperately asks, "Why are you bombing us? What did we do to you? Stop it already." The sentence seems so incredibly surreal when you consider that Russia has been attacking Ukrainian cities with rockets, drones, and glide bombs for years. Even as you watch this video, there's a good chance that another Ukrainian city is being bombed right now. What we're seeing here is the incredible distortion of reality, or even denial of reality, within Russia. For many people, this war remains something distant for a long time, visible on television, but not noticeable in their own daily lives. The destruction of Kharkiv, Dnipro, Kiev, or Odessa was consumed like news from another world, like something that happens very far away without their own involvement or responsibility, like something that was unavoidable. Now suddenly drones are appearing over Moscow, airports are being closed, industrial facilities are burning, and explosions can be seen in the background of the Kremlin. And losses, the declining economy. We don't even need to talk about losses, which are spreading right now. Some people are reacting to this with real shock, as if the war is suddenly coming to them even though Russia started it itself. I wonder if he even knows that. That also explains why the Russian leadership reacts so incredibly sensitively to attacks in its own territory. Not because of financial or military damage, but because it breaks the most important illusion for people. The idea that Russia could wage a war without its own society really feeling it. In Stovu, in the Russian region of Nizhny Novgorod, industrial facilities were once again attacked by Ukrainian drones, and this time a refinery was also hit. It hit the Lukoil Nizhny Novgorod Nefteor facility. The refinery was founded by the Nizhny Novgorod Corporation. According to reports, several explosions could be heard. A fire then broke out on the premises. The refinery is a key facility for the Lukoil Corporation, making the attack especially significant. Such sites do not operate in isolation. They supply entire regions with fuel, chemical products, and industrial raw materials. What is striking, of course, is how deep inside Russia these attacks are now taking place. The Nizhny Novgorod region is far from the front. Nevertheless, Russia now has to secure critical energy infrastructure against drones even there. And we will very likely see in the future that this will continue to shift further towards the Urals when the first major refineries near the border go offline again. New drone footage from Kostiantynivka shows the extent of the destruction just about 20 kilometers away. Burned out apartment blocks, destroyed schools, kindergartens, hospitals, and a heavily damaged church now characterize entire districts. Kostiantynivka in particular is increasingly becoming an example of how the war in Donbass has changed. In the past, cities like Bakhmut or Avdiivka were considered rare cases of extreme devastation because extremely long battles took place there, which were very costly in terms of both casualties and especially equipment. Today, this pattern is repeating itself along the next line of defensive positions further to the west. The city is not being hit this hard by chance. Kostiantynivka is located directly behind several important front lines and has long served as a military hub for Ukrainian operations in central Donbass. That's exactly why the city is constantly under Russian pressure from artillery, glide bombs, and drones. Following the motto, "If I can't conquer it, I'll just destroy it." Let's check the map to see where the front line is. Here, the dark red area, that's what's been newly added on the Russian side. They don't control every building in the area marked in dark red, but the Russian presence here is extremely strong. That's why I just marked it in dark red. I assume that there are relatively few Ukrainian units here, which are of course outnumbered by the Russian ones. Here in the yellow area, north of the vocational school, there are currently a lot of battles taking place, mostly infantry against infantry or drones against infantry. But it's hard to say who really has the upper hand here because Ukrainian and Russian attacks are happening everywhere in this area and with about the same intensity. What we see down here near the greenhouse is a lot of Russian airstrikes, especially in this area, which of course means for us that the Russians do not control the area yet. Yes, otherwise they wouldn't keep bombing it. Airstrikes mainly here, near the 2nd Battalion of the 156th Mechanized Group. That means the Russians are having trouble advancing further into the city here from the west or from the south. Here along the methane gas station, it's quite calm, but as I said, here north of the vocational school, that's where most of the fighting is currently taking place. Here the neighborhood is heavily contested, and apart from that, there are still isolated fights here in the yellow area. We looked at that in the situation report recently. Here, there are also isolated fights taking place, but it doesn't look like the Russians are fully controlling the area yet, and that's roughly the situation here on the ground. But even a few kilometers further west in the Krosh port area, the situation for Ukrainian units on the northern outskirts of the city is apparently becoming increasingly critical. The 7th, the Ukrainian Rapid Reaction Corps, as they call themselves, openly announced today that several of their positions are practically cut off. According to them, Russian forces control the surrounding heights, have set up observation systems and electronic warfare there, and dominate the airspace over the northern approaches to the city. Notably, they describe logistics as shifting, with resupply now almost exclusively done by drone. Even unmanned ground vehicles are now being attacked and destroyed by Russian FPV drones. This shows how massively this war has also changed technologically over this period. Entire front positions now depend on whether small drones can still deliver ammunition, water, or batteries at night. The public statements in this declaration are probably no coincidence. This usually happens on the Ukrainian side when targeted pressure is meant to be applied to their own military leadership. Apparently, there is now a debate within the Ukrainian army about whether certain outposts can still be meaningfully held from a military standpoint, or if they are already located in Russian kill zones. More specifically, this is the position in question. That is the one held by the 2nd Battalion of the 25th Paratrooper Brigade. It is located here. This is a small village here with just a few houses, and this is a position of the battalion that they are using against the Russians. You see, the Russians captured Pokrovsk here some time ago and are trying to break out to the northwest. But up here, they can hardly make any progress. They can hardly manage to get out of Hirschner. At the same time, they are also trying to close things off here. This works partly through attacks up here via the villages, with the help of the 5th Motorized Rifle Brigade, which is trying to break through here. At the same time, down here, they're trying with the 36th Motorized Rifle Brigade and the 506th Motorized Rifle Regiment to take the Ukrainian positions, which are quite well fortified here, and especially provide very good coverage to the south. And now on the Ukrainian side, they're wondering whether these positions here even make sense anymore, and whether they should even be defended. In theory, all the subunits located here, including those at Rudinsky, could withdraw to this line here and continue defending from there. Maybe, if necessary, use the forces to regain the upper hand here at Hirschner and cut off the Russians here again. All of that would be possible, of course, in theory. But for that, you would have to give up these positions here, which would naturally give the Russians an advantage again. First, they have a closed front here, allowing them to withdraw their units and avoid this large encirclement. And then they could try again to break through somewhere along the Ukrainian defenses on a broad front, maybe somewhere in the direction of Shevchenko. Everything has pros and cons, like most things in life. But of course, one wonders now these positions are really extremely close to the front, which means that drones have already been able to reach them for a long time anyway. And when you're in this area, you're mainly being observed and flanked quite well by the Russians here in the east, and then you're targeted by artillery, glide bombs, and especially by drones, when at the same time you can hardly supply your own soldiers, since they can more or less only be reached by drones. And with these statements, that's exactly what it's about. Because the core argument was, modern drone warfare makes static defense in unfavorable positions extremely costly in terms of losses. Anyone who remains in open or abandoned positions will be slowly worn down by FPV drones, artillery reconnaissance, and constant aerial surveillance. And that's exactly what seems to be happening here north of Pokrovsk right now. Russia apparently is not trying so much for a quick frontal assault out of the city, but rather to set up a controlled fire trap. Control of high ground, electronic warfare, and FPV dominance ensure that Ukrainian movements are becoming increasingly dangerous. And at the same time, some of the Ukrainian strongholds have operational significance, because it's especially interesting here in this area, which I mentioned earlier. Even a small strip of forest or a single color can be decisive here, delaying Russian advances or keeping the main access points to the agglomeration open. Yes, in Pokrovsk, and especially in this area, the whole situation increasingly feels like a preview of the next phase of the war in Donbass. Fewer classic breakthroughs with tank columns, but rather slowly suffocated defensive positions under constant drone and surveillance pressure. But all of this comes at a cost. Of course, it also costs the Russian side, and we can see that here, because Russia keeps sending its people to certain death. Every real pro-Russian, and I don't mean just any Z blogger or anyone who supports the war here, but every real pro-Russian, anyone supporting this war on the Russian side isn't pro-Russian, as he doesn't love his country or people, because he should do everything to make this war end as quickly as possible, so that Russia and its people can recover from it. Let me show you what I mean when I say that the Russian people are being sacrificed for just a few meters a day. Take a look here. A Russian soldier is running through a well-known minefield. In front of him, 3 fallen comrades are already lying. There could be another one lying next to him. I couldn't see that one clearly, but there are 3 fallen soldiers in front of him, which I've censored here. Why has the war ended for these 3? Well, because they walked into a minefield. That means the Russians must be aware that there is a minefield there. And yet, he sends the next subordinate in to clear the minefield. Why? Because the squad leader, the company commander, the Ministry of Defense, and the Kremlin absolutely don't give a damn that the next Russian is about to step on the next mine. Because even if he dies in the process, at least he has cleared a mine, and the next soldier won't be able to step there anymore. I wonder how many more have to run through until the whole minefield is cleared and the first one can make it through unharmed. But that's exactly what I mean. Every time I read somewhere that the Kremlin is doing something good for Russia with this war, yes, victory for Russia and so on, you have to keep images like these in mind. You can find the video on my Telegram channel. Obviously, I can't show it to you on YouTube. Let's stick with that, because Russia is not just betraying its units, but also itself as a nation. Putin has stated that Russia and China are ready to support each other on key issues, especially when it comes to protecting their sovereignty. Outwardly, this sounds like a sign of a close strategic partnership. In reality, however, it also shows how dependent Russia has become on China. Because since the beginning of the war, Moscow has lost a large part of its economic alternatives. Sanctions, the withdrawal of Western technology, and the loss of European markets have pushed Russia more and more toward Beijing. That's why the balance of power between the two countries is also shifting significantly. China is not acting as an equal ally, but increasingly as the dominant side. Russia needs markets, electronics, industrial components, and financial stability. China decides under which conditions and whether it wants to provide this support at all. And that's exactly where the strategic problem lies for the Kremlin. Russia originally wanted to appear as an independent superpower, but is increasingly developing into a supplier of raw materials and resources to China. The longer the war lasts and the more isolated Moscow becomes, the greater Beijing's influence on the Russian economy and foreign policy will be. For China, this is absolutely ideal. It couldn't be better for them, because Beijing gets cheap resources, geopolitical influence, and a weakened partner who has less and less room to negotiate. Russia presents this to the public as a strategic friendship, but as I said, in reality, the whole situation is shifting more toward dependence in favor of China. The 15th Army Corps of Ukraine has released new summaries of its drone operations. You can see attacks on Russian soldiers, vehicles, shelters, and artillery, but notably, antennas and relay points for communication equipment are also hit quite frequently. This is particularly interesting because it shows how the war is increasingly shifting toward communication and network warfare. Since access to Starlink has become more difficult for Russian forces, or rather, since similar systems can no longer be used reliably everywhere, the importance of traditional radio and antenna infrastructure is growing enormously again. And it is precisely these systems that are being increasingly targeted by Ukrainian drones. Because without stable communication, effective reconnaissance, drone coordination, artillery fire, and command structures, things will go much worse. Sometimes the loss of a single antenna or a repeater node is enough to blind entire sections or massively worsen reaction times. You can also see how precise modern drone warfare has become. It's no longer just about hitting individual soldiers or vehicles. Russian technical infrastructure, which enables combat readiness, is increasingly being targeted. Thank you to all subscribers, channel members, and the Algo crew. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Renneke, Celia Didifer, and Jürgen Meyerhofer. Please subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next report.